This week on the podcast, we have Mike Kohn. Mike has a long history in athletics and leadership, including being a multiple-time Olympian, an Olympic medalist as an athlete, being the Olympic coach for USA Bobsledding, and an Army career of over 20 years. Throughout the episode, he goes into what it took to find his coaching philosophy, learning how to work with different types of athletes, and the ability to learn lessons from everyone around him. This is a must-listen for anyone who wants a deep dive conversation into the complexity of the athlete-coach relationship and how crucial it can be. As always, thank you for listening and enjoy the episode.
Before we hit the intro music, I wanted to introduce to you guys the Yoakum Strength Insider. The Yoakum Strength Insider is our online training platform that takes all of the ideas that we talk about on this podcast and implements them into a program that is available to you at the touch of your fingers. Our goal with the Yoakum Strength Insider is to create better movers, to level up your life, and to move forward from where you are. We do this in a holistic fashion. Not only will you receive a program that has helped hundreds of people become better movers, you'll also receive access to our app that allows you to track everything, has video links for all exercises, and allows you to be in constant communication with the Yoakum Strength coach. Along with this, you'll get our 30-page PDF nutrition and lifestyle guidelines. That includes everything from what to eat, how much of it to eat, why we're eating it, meditation habits, and other lifestyle habits that we implement with our clients to really level up their lives. If you're interested in trying out one of these programs, use podcast 25 in the discount section right before you pay for 25% off your first program. Boom.
This is the Yoakum Strength Podcast. Take the leap down the rabbit hole with us as we interview elite level guests to unravel what high performance really is.
All right. Well, let's try it. Let's rip it. Welcome to the podcast, Coach. I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Austin.
Yeah,
Great to meet you.
It's great to meet you. Tristan, I was telling you before on round one of the podcast recording when the computers were beefing with us, Tristan sent over this long accolade list of everything that you've done. It's pretty sweet. I'm excited to kind of dive into some of these things. So you were up until 2022, the Olympic bobsled coach, correct?
Yeah, so I've got an interesting story. I was a bobsledder for 20 years. I was a push athlete for 12. In 2002, I was fortunate to go to the Olympic Games, and our team won an Olympic medal, and that was amazing. I was an alternate in 2006. In 2010, I was a bobsled driver, and that was my final Olympic Games. And when I got done in 2010, I retired, and I had no interest in coaching. And I got a phone call, and they said, "Hey, we'd like you to coach." And I remember saying, I don't know anything about coaching. And they said, "Well, you'll learn as you go." So they gave me a whistle, and they throw me out there, and I coached at development level for quite some time. And I worked my way up to the national team, and I became the assistant coach to the head coach for the national team. And we went to the Olympic Games, and we won 4 Olympic medals. Our bobsled athletes won 4 Olympic medals, which we only have 3 disciplines in the sport. So it was an amazing success. We had 3 silvers and a bronze. And I came home, and I remember how satisfied I felt and how excited I was about being a coach. And I reached out to the leadership of our organization. I reached out to the head coach and the CEO and the high performance director. And I said, "Hey, I want to come back for another 4 years. I want to coach again. And, we got to get the team going here. We only got 4 years, and we got to get ready." And so I was pretty eager to get started, and no one called me back. I couldn't get any phone calls back. And I kept reaching out, and no one would return my calls or my emails. And I finally got our head coach on the phone one day, who's my best friend. And I said, "Hey, what is going on?" I said, I got to feed my family here. No one will call me back. And he says, "I don't think they're going to bring you back." And I said, "Why not?" And he says, "Well, you're rubbing people the wrong way." And I said, "What?" When he said that, I knew deep in my heart I wasn't being the best version of myself. I knew that I was not very good at coaching. And so jump ahead, they said, "Well, we'll bring you back, but you've got to get some coaching education. You've got to get some leadership education and learn how to coach better." So I said, "Okay." So I enrolled in a master's program, and I was in the military at the time. So I took my captain's career course, and I enrolled in a national team coaching leadership education program the USOC had, and I began reading a lot of books on leadership and coaching and effectiveness and all this stuff. And there was one group of people I ran into from the UK. They were called the People Academy, and I've partnered with them since. And they taught me more about coaching, this one component, and they taught me about human behavior. They taught me about preferences and styles and communication styles and communicating in high performance environments and that sort of thing. And jump ahead 4 years, we went to Korea. It was our final, I thought my final Olympics as a coach, and I was what I thought was a fairly successful Olympics as an assistant coach. And so I planned to step away. Our athletes had won a silver medal there. So we weren't disappointed with the silver medal. We were disappointed with the medal count. But it was a good time to step away. We lost our top athlete. He passed away, unfortunately, unexpectedly. And so I had planned to step down. And the CEO, who was looking to fire me 4 years prior, called me. And he says, hey, we'd like you to be the head coach. And I almost dropped the phone. I was floored. I just couldn't believe it. And the problem was my best friend was the head coach at the time. So we had to have a conversation, and he was great. He said, you know what, take it. And I remember telling him, I'm not taking this unless you are going to support me on it, and we're going to do it together. And we did. We had a great, Brian Scheimer is his name, and we had a great 4 years. And so I was the head coach up and through Beijing, and then after Beijing, our athletes went on to win a gold, silver, and a bronze in Beijing during COVID, which wasn't exciting that way, but it was exciting to be successful as a team. And after that, I decided it was time to retire, and I stepped away. But I learned so much about relationships and human behavior and emotional intelligence, and how to interact with your athletes better and your fellow coaches and that sort of thing. And it changed everything for me. And now I'm fortunate to be able to teach that to other coaches. So I try to spend a lot of my time working with other coaches to try to help them, learn about themselves, be more self-aware of how they're impacting their athletes, and hopefully be a better version of themselves.
That's a really sweet story, and I think it's something that a lot I know myself specifically struggle with, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. It's like, was it something where, because you were a high performance athlete yourself, you were, I mean, and obviously you went through the army, you were an Olympic athlete yourself, like you were going through all these things, so you have a lot of data points to prove that like the way you see the world works, right? Because like everything you see, it works, so it's like it should work for everybody else, and like kind of forcing people through the mold. And I remember, I was very similar when I went from my college like athlete days to my very first year of coaching, where I was just trying to force all of the athletes to the exact mold that worked for me. And then it's a really tough mold to break out of, because you have data points to back up that it works. So it's like you're almost just like re reassimilating that, like that ego, and reassimilating that story you tell yourself of like, no, they're wrong, I'm right, look at my data points, and you can back it up. And it's like, yeah, but you're a coach, like, and it's not right because it's not working with those athletes. And I had a very similar like eye-opening experience of all of these athletes see the world through so many different lenses. And the cool part is they can see the world through different lenses and get coached different ways and do it in a different way and be ultra successful. And that was such a cool, like, eye-opening experience for me myself as a coach. What was that like for you? Was that a very similar experience? Were you trying to coach the same way you had been coached and had been like training, and like had to switch it up? Like what was that kind of journey like for you?
You couldn't be more correct. It started with putting a mirror in front of myself and beginning to ask myself, hey, Mike, how do you interact verbally? What's your body language like? Are you a direct coach, or are you a coach that's more influential? Are you calm and steady, or maybe you're into details? There's all sorts of ways to look at this. And, one thing we try to tell coaches is think of yourself as being on a mountaintop. And your mountaintop is how you see the world, right? And imagine there's other people on their mountaintops, and that they all have their perspective, right? And even if you're on a mountaintop next to me and we're looking at the same thing, we're still seeing it a little bit differently from a different angle. And so we try to get people to climb down from your mountaintop a little bit, climb up theirs, and try to see if they're going to have a different view of how to accomplish their goal. or how to help this team get better. And it's a matter of crawl inside someone's head and understand how they see this thing, but we can try. And when I tried is when everything changed for me, because it begs the question, well, if my view is my view and your view is your view, well, who's right? And you know what? You're exactly right, Austin. We're all right, but we can all be wrong if we overplay our perspective as being the one that's the best one. It
Mm.
really depends on the athlete, and it's about what's the best perspective for that athlete and how can I meet them where they are to help them achieve what they need to achieve. Because oftentimes coaches get in this bubble and it's my way or the highway. I know what I'm talking about. I've been there and done that. And that may work for one or two, but it's not going to work for everyone. We all have a different perspective.
It's the ultimate survivorship bias you see. It's like I see you see it so often, especially in the college strength and conditioning sector and the American football world, where it's like, yeah, it worked for the 10 out of the 100 athletes, and it worked really well for those 10, but you could have you could have just, and that's the thing. It's like this is something that I've been learning the last like 5 or 6 years. It's like, it doesn't mean throw out all of your principles, right? It doesn't mean throw out everything you believe in. It just means like meeting somebody slightly where they're at, like in that slight step of just opening up with them, they will also meet you slightly where you're at. And you'll find that beautiful middle ground where instead of helping 10 out of the 100 athletes, you're going to have 100 out of 100 athletes with just slight compromises. And that was one of the really cool things in the American football world is the difference in like phenotypes in the athletes where like you have a wide receiver versus like a defensive lineman or an offensive lineman, right? Like, and I was in the trenches growing up and it was all like rah, rah, like attack, like everything's go, squeeze, sear. And then you have this like hybrid, like just beautiful wide receiver where it's like the reason they are success. And this was a big eye opener moment. It's like, the reason they are successful is the same thing that frustrates you. It's their relaxed, the ability to create and explore and like be way more open than you are in your current position. And you mentioned this. I don't know if it was when we were recording or before, but you were talking about how we can steal from all sorts of disciplines. And I was like, man, if the defense alignment could just have a little bit of that confidence that wide receiver has, a little bit of that looseness that wide receiver has, how much better would they be? And if the wide receiver can just take a little bit of that grind and a little bit of that get after it mentality that the defense and offensive linemen have, like how much better they be? And that's when it really got fun for me as a coach of like starting to paint these different aspects. But I think the biggest thing that I had this eye-opening moment of like, it doesn't mean throw out everything that you believe in. It just means like slight middle ground meeting. And again, it's conversations with your athletes. Like that's if you just have conversations with your athletes, man, it solves 99% of these issues. And just for a long time, it wasn't real conversations I was having. It was me preaching and them either listening and drinking all of the Kool-Aid or just like sitting there listening me preach. And I'm thinking I'm getting through to them and they're really not. They're just saying whatever they know they need to say to get me to shut up, pretty much.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And it starts with being self-aware. So it starts with understanding how you interact with people first, right? How do you adjust your behavior to influence your athletes and get them to follow you to victory or to accomplish the mission, whatever that might be? And the second component to this, once you understand yourself and how you operate. So for example, with myself, I had to take a DISC. I don't know if you've ever heard of DISC behavior testing, but DISC is a program that was developed by William Moulton Marston. He developed the polygraph in the early 1900s. He also developed the superhero Wonder Woman. And he developed the DISC fundamentals, which the DISC, what that stands for is dominant coaches. So this is kind of a Bill Belichick type coach. These are the coaches that are in your face that tell you exactly what you need to hear. They're driving and direct and assertive and challenging and that sort of thing. And then you have the influential coaches. And those people are often positive and verbal, communicative, outgoing. I think, just from meeting you, I think you're an I. You're more of an influential person. You're a communicative person. You're outgoing. You're a positive person. And then you have S's. My wife is an S. These are people who are the coaches that are often very steady and calm. They're amiable. They don't bring a lot of complex. They can bring some complexity, but they don't bring a lot of anxiety to a situation. They can calm it down. And then you've got your coaches that are often into rules and standards and compliance, or conscientious is what the C stands for. And I learned early on that I was a D, I was direct. And I was telling people exactly like it is. And if you don't like it, that's too bad, so sad, hit the bricks, get out of here. Yes, you're not on my team, that kind of thing. And when I learned that a lot of our team was made up of different personalities, I began, or behaviors, this is a behavior test. I began to have to use my self-awareness and my people acuity, which is my ability to consciously adjust my behavior to what they need, and then have that agility to bounce back and forth between athlete and coach. And uh, could be a sponsor, could be a boss, a CEO, a high performance director, and then self-manage, which is constantly self-managing myself. So it wasn't about changing the person that I was, because I was driving direct, results-oriented, challenging, assertive, inquisitive. I was that type of coach. It was about not overplaying my strengths, is what we like to say. So that's a strength, right? We all have these attributes that define us as coaches, but we don't want to overplay that. If we overplay that now, let's imagine a coach who's too driving, who's too direct, who's too results oriented, who's too challenging. Well, you're going to really annoy those steady, calm athletes that, they seem to be more reserved, but there's a lot going on in there. You've seen these athletes. They're very successful oftentimes. It's just that they're much calmer and easygoing. And, I'll take Barry Sanders. You remember running back Barry Sanders for
Oh
the
yeah.
Detroit Lions, most likely an S. So a very steady, calm guy, never celebrated a touchdown. He didn't care about records. It was just, he prided himself on his work. Very steady, calm guy, went back to the sideline and just took his helmet off, took a drink of water. That's just the way he was. So understanding people and their behaviors is critical. And that's what changed everything for me. I mean, I went from a coach who almost got fired. The same leadership 4 years later asked me to be the head coach. And the only thing I really changed was in this whole thing was my emotional intelligence. I didn't learn more about bobsled. It just became an adjustment in my emotional intelligence.
And did you have a process of doing that? Because I know the S's specifically, I get their a question. I really like that system of laying it out. I'm definitely an I, 100%. That was a great read on your part, 100%. And like I feel like I'm able to go much. I think the one that I struggle with is that analytical side. Like that's the one that I definitely try to. And for me, it's using tools that give me analytics, give me tools so I can reach out to those analytical athletes. So like that's where the sports science part of it really, really helps me. So if I have an analytical athlete, for them, I will really bias numbers and things like to reach them on that level. But I know I have a lot of like, especially a lot of interns. I think the last like 3 interns I had, they were much more S and they want to have the ability to go more D, right? Like, and just have that ability to like reach athletes in that way. Did you have a process of like, okay, I need to work on these certain aspects and the ability to do that? Like how did you build out that emotional like intelligence and the ability to kind of you keep your strengths, like you're not throwing away the strengths, but also build up these other strengths and these other ways to relate with these athletes?
So I actually printed this out. I don't know if you can read this, but I'll show it to you. Um, can you read that?
Hmm.
So I was this red guy, very full of all these attributes in red, and I think this is you here in the yellow. And my biggest fear is failure, and I'm focused on the task. Most eyes, their biggest fear is rejection. They are motivated by public praise and recognition. And then
What a
on the
call
back,
out.
and then these are your. Now we're all a little bit of each of these. So all of us are a little bit of all of these, but there's a gravitational pull to one or the other. And your S's, you're going to see they're kind, calm, amiable. They're motivated by predictability. These are athletes that stick to the plan. They don't deviate. They wake up every morning. They do their thing. They don't like uncertainty. As C's, this is my second letter. So, and you can tell by the way I continue to talk. I get a little long-winded because I feel like as a C, I got to fit it all in. So I got to realize that I can be this too much, right? So I don't like chaos and conflict, and we got to fit it all in, and we're rules and standards, and these are the people who love spreadsheets, and they're very detail-oriented. These are those athletes you're talking about that are certainly highly motivated by detail, right? And to an eye, to someone like you, that can drive you a little bit nuts because it's your relationship based. Your focus is the relationship and getting along and let's be motivated, right? And to a C, these are athletes that are oftentimes very into details in the mud, and they don't wear their heart on their sleeve. They're kind of stoic in their face, and they just kind of come in, do their job, and go away. You'll find a lot of these people in in the umpire world or in the referee world. You know,
All of my
they
athletes are accountants like that.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
all like robot accountants. They love it.
yeah.
And they're like really good athletes. So I'm like, whenever I get an Division One athlete that their major is accounting, I'm like, okay, yep, I know exactly where this is gonna go.
Yeah. And so, that's what helped me. I'll give you an example. I had two athletes. I reached out to two athletes one day and I said, hey, well, I did this with all of my athletes, but there were two that stood out. So I reached out and I did it I verbally said, hey, just a question for you. How do you like to be coached? And one of them looked at me and said, give it to me straight. Don't beat around the bush and don't waste time with me. And that was it. And he walked off and it was done. And so another one, it was a female. I said, "Hey, how do you like to be coached?" And she said, I said, you can get back to me whenever. You don't have to answer now, whatever. And I said that to the guy too. The next day, I got a 2-page email from the female about how she wanted to be coached. And so there's this male female difference as well. But I've gotten those long-winded emails or long-winded answers from males as well. And I've also gotten the short answer from females. So but there's a difference there as well. So I knew with that direct athlete, I could give it to him straight. He would make a mistake and I would say, "Hey man, you're really sucking right now. You need to pick it up." And he'd say, "Okay, Roger that," and go back to work, right? And then with other people, I knew that their focus was a relationship. They needed to have a relationship with me. It started with that, and then we can start to build upon the task of accomplishing the mission, whatever our job is here as a team. And so that person, instead of telling them, "Hey, you're sucking today," I'd say, "Hey, how'd you feel on that one? How did that feel?" And get them to talk first and get them to get going. On the C's, a lot of them, I just let them go. Andy Murray, who's a tennis player from Great Britain, he's a high C. He'll just chat forever. You ask him a question, you turn the volume down, you won't know if he won or lost the match. He just goes on about his hand in the racket and how he was holding it and how the ball bounced here and this way in that direction and he those very detail oriented people, they just go and ramble. So it's really about knowing who they are, what they need, and how I can self manage my behavior to fit them.
Have you found the power, and this is so we're talking about the power in like being able to open yourself up as a coach and be able to like kind of ebb and flow between these DICS. Have you found the power in like, because like especially with the C athletes, I have found massive power in getting them to be a little bit more I, or getting them to be like just branching out. And for most of those, and I think that one's the most. I think it's the most eye-opening for me because we're such on different like ends of the spectrum. Where like the D's, like I can relate to very well. Like I understand that side of it. Where as the S's, where it's like they are very stuck in a box. Where if I start to understand their box, that really helps me, my creative mind, where I don't go fucking just crazy and like have all these ideas and things out there. And for them, if they just get to breathe and like relax a little bit, and you get them, and like that's been some of the coolest conversations is getting them to not only myself like going a little bit more into their setting, but when you go into their setting, they start to come into yours and they start to free up. And when you get a lot of these analytical athletes, at least in the American football world, when I work with them, it's really cool to see when they relax a little bit and kind of like they use all of the discipline and structure and the data pieces that they have, the very locked in type A, like I'm going to go, go, go. And you get them to like be a little bit more creative. You get them to be a little bit more open. You get them to try something. That's the biggest thing. A lot of times, like you get them to try something that is not within their routine to see if it works or not, and having them be all right with that. Like, have you had a process of that with your athletes?
Absolutely. It's a lot of that is building trust, to get an, especially with an S. S's are the type of athlete that um, they'll forgive you, but they won't forget if you make a mistake. And you've got to earn their trust over a long period of time. Eyes will trust you right away. they'll trust you right away. It's a very distinct attribute they have. They'll trust you right off the bat. And but S is you got to earn it. And so with them, understanding all these things is what really helped me understand each athlete, and then having as many individual conversations, because you're right. So many athletes today, and yeah, I would argue it didn't happen back earlier. When I was a younger athlete in the 80s and 90s, I don't know that it happened then either. But these one-on-one interactions that you have as a coach and an athlete, I think are critical to success. We've got to know how to achieve success, how we're going to communicate in those final moments before you run out on that football field, or what it's going to be like in the huddle, or how you like to receive information, or how you need to give it, or vice versa, so that when we get in that high pressure, high stress situation, we've got our behavior and our communication down. Because, in a high performance environment, we'll look at things like our strength and conditioning, our speed, we'll look at nutrition, we'll look at sports psychology, we'll look at sports medicine, we'll look at all the equipment components to success. We'll look at sleep, we'll look at all these things. But my question is to our athletes and coaches out there, how often do you look at your communication style? How often do you look at your behavior? And do those things matter in a high performance, high stress, high stakes environment where, we're at the Olympic Games and we're in fourth place, or we've got the ball on the 2 yard line and there's 1 second left on the clock? What matters right now? And I tell you, what I see happen a lot of times is people just throw stuff at the wall and hope it sticks because they haven't sat down and had this conversation. I'll give you an example. You got this. We've all heard that right before an athlete runs out to compete. You got this. What? I can't stand that. Some athletes love it. I can't stand you got this, right? The reason for me is because my C comes into play here is because I'm kind of an analytical person. No one has got anything out here yet, right? I have to go and achieve it. I got to earn this. And what I like to say and what I like to hear is, you can do this. You can do it. You can do this, Mike. You know, I'm not a fan of you got this. Nobody's got this. No one's got anything. It presumes that all you got to do is go out there and it'll just happen, and that's not true. So it's about selectively, figuring out what is the proper way to communicate. What do I need to tell you? What do you want to hear? If you're a direct athlete, you may want to say something like, "You own this stadium, Austin. Go rock it." If you're an I, I may say to you, "Hey, go bring the audience to their feet." If you're an S, I may say, "Hey, you know, I would say something like, stick to the plan," because you're a planner. You love planning, right? And for a C who often goes off and questions, they constantly questions things, I would say, "You're ready for this." So those final moments of communication between a coach and an athlete, I would argue they're highly critical, and not, some people would say this is a soft skill. It's something like you want. Now, I would say this is a major tool in the toolbox for me when I communicate. And, other athletes feel the same way. If they're not getting in their ear what they need to motivate them to achieve success, and the coach isn't saying it the right way, well, let's sit down and talk about it, figure it out. What do we need to say and do and expect from one another in those high pressure, high stress situations, so we can, maybe nothing is the answer. There are athletes that don't want to hear anything. I don't want to talk. I just want to stick to the task. I want to stay on task. I don't want, relationship to come into this thing. Those things need to be discussed early on, and it starts with building trust.
Yeah, and like you said, like everybody will look at everything else other than like these components, and they'll kind of like look at this stuff as like the woo-woo-y, like new age way of coaching. But it's like, man, in the moment, like that's all you got with that athlete right there. And these small like small little details, like if you can like I just think back to like certain things that have gotten me in the flow state, or certain things that have got me engaged in, like just how much better of an athlete I am when I'm motivated and engaged. And like every athlete, when they are motivated and engaged in the task at hand, and if you find words to get them motivated and engaged, man, they're like, then they can do what they're supposed to do on the field. But if they're not motivated and engaged, they're somewhere else in their brain, whatever it is, it's not clicking with them. Like, man, that is a massive component. That is like it's a limitless pill that if we were able to take, we would take every day, and it would be a performance enhancing drug. But it's just words. But like if you talk about the words like this, if you talk about some of these things, you have a lot of meathead strength coaches be like, oh yeah, it doesn't really matter, that type of thing. It's just yell at
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. And, for some, it may not matter. It's just kind of what they do. But I would say I would call those people a one-trick pony. You're a one-trick pony. You're not a virtuoso. You need to be a virtuoso, meaning you can move across the spectrum because we've all had different types of athletes. We've all had the loud, boisterous, high energy, life of the party athlete that comes in the room and you know when they're in the room, right? And then we've got that equally highly valuable athlete in the room that doesn't talk. That just kind of sits over in the corner and does their thing, and that's okay too. They need each other. And now let's imagine a coach and an athlete like that. If I'm the quiet one and I'm not as verbal, well, rather than say that person's annoying, why don't I look at that person and say, I actually need that person. I need some high energy in this room because I'm not bringing it, right? And if I am the high energy, maybe I need that calming presence. So it's about and now it's about really having the communication, understanding, am I overplaying my strengths? Am I being someone who is overly outgoing and overly verbal? Or am I being too quiet? There was a great coach that we had in our USOPC Olympic BMX program. He was a highly quiet coach. He just didn't speak much. And he came out of his shell. He realized this. Once he realized that he needed to come out of his shell and be more outgoing and give more attention and praise to people, it changed everything in his life. He's one of the coaches that we were able to change his trajectory in his coaching career as well. He got better as a result of that.
Have you found because this is one thing that I'm seeing, especially, so I'm working with this like group of baseball seems like to be the worst with it, in it's almost like it's forcing everybody into this S model because there's so much data. Like, have you seen a trend of like athletes being forced into a model and a way of like, I almost feel like it's way less like back in the day. It used to be everybody was forced into like the D-ish model, like where it was like it's all yelling, you have to be like high motivation, like loud, that type of thing. Where now it seems like it's a lot of these athletes that are not naturally that way are forced into this S model, and they kind of get trapped there. And for the athletes that, again, it's another survivorship thing where it's like the athletes that do well with that stuff, it's amazing. And the coaches that do well with that stuff, it's amazing. But I've seen so many athletes where I'm like, okay, all of that data is saying it, but like, how do you feel? And you ask them how they feel, and it's such a better question for them than showing them the data. But the baseball world has been just such an eye-opening experience of so many of these athletes that are not naturally in that S type world, in that data-driven world, are now forced into it because everything they do is like metritized. Like it's all a metric, and that's all that matters. But then you ask them about the feel of their swing, or what they saw, or what they like were thinking about during that, and then they actually start to open up and they start to engage, and you start to get a lot of results from the actual metrics. And again, that's where it's like it's not throwing out the metrics; it's just like not forcing them into it. But have you seen that kind of like shift into that like a mold where they don't really fit? And it's like it's almost a shift that is like it's backed up by, whereas like the D model is harder to back up by science, right? Because you don't actually have numbers to say, oh, we won more X amount of games because we won. Whereas now I feel like it's a kind of a dangerous game, because it's like we have, regardless of what's go right or wrong, we as coaches can protect our own egos and protect our own jobs, because like, well, that all happened, but I have my Excel sheets to show that it should have. So it's kind of just on the athlete type thing. And I see it a lot, and it just kind of makes me mad when some of these athletes get trapped in some of these cycles.
Yeah, well, it's the culture, and the culture of the organization matters too. And one of the ways we flush that out in bobsled is to talk about that culture and to sit down and try to figure out what is it we're doing, because there's elephants in the room oftentimes. And if you're right, if you've got a culture, and I've been on these teams as well, where you've got a team of people that there's just not a lot of verbal activity, and I'm not sure if devices cause that. There's a shutting down. There's kind of a reluctance for people to be outgoing and share things, and so those people, that highly direct or highly influential coaches or team member can often, seem like an oddball. on the team because they're just being themselves. They're just being themselves. And oftentimes I've been on teams where you need that guy. You need the person on the team that's highly motivated, that's fired up and ready to go. And I've also seen a difference. I like to say there's a difference in athletes. Oftentimes you'll see some are artists and some are technicians. And technicians are often that Moneyball movie type athlete that they're caught up in all the analytics and the metrics, and that matters to them and it's important. But the problem with that is that they can spin themselves into their feelings may not become apparent. They can overthink problems. They'll have this what I call paralysis by analysis kind of thing going on. That they may want a perfect solution. They're constantly looking for perfection with these metrics and analytics and data and things of that nature. But they'll often just get in this cycle and can't get out of it. They're not playing baseball anymore. They're now caught up in this world of analytics and data, and they've got all these spreadsheets, but they're not playing baseball anymore. And then on the flip side of that, you've got the people who are the artists, and they won't, often take times to overanalyze anything. They'll just kind of go out there and reflection's not their normal modus operandi. They're going to be more interested in relationships. Personal integrity is important to them. They'll any implied personal criticism will hurt them. They won't. The energy on the team matters. The relationships matter. How we're interacting matter. That motivates them. So it's, don't be surprised with any insecurities with those people either. They can often be the energy on the team, but they'll often stray sometimes too far away from the rules and the standards and the details. So again, there's nothing wrong with either one of these because you can pick athletes, whether it's, I mean, you can name any top athlete, whether it's Tiger Woods, Serena Williams, Tom Brady. They're all a little bit different. They all have a little bit different style, but it's really about getting the recipe right and not overplaying this particular set of attributes that defines you. But I agree. I think with technology and the cell phone, world, we've become more secluded in our ways. The doors are, I remember when I was a kid at the Olympic Training Center, there were no devices. So the doors were propped open. You propped the door open because you wanted someone to come in your room, and everyone's door was propped open in the dorm. So you were running down, going into people's rooms and telling jokes and laughing. Hey, did you see that show last night or whatever? Or hey, guess what happened at the bar last night or whatever. And today the rooms are closed and people have their headphones on. So that human interaction component, I think, is just becoming less and less, and it's the way of the world. I don't know that it's the right thing or best thing, but it is part of our environment, something we have to deal with in sport. I mandated that our athletes were not allowed to have cell phones at dinner. And so when I said, listen, this is only 45 minutes of your day, I'm asking you to put your phone away and interact with your team at dinner time. And a lot of them didn't like it. And you could tell the addiction component, right? The dopamine drip was kicking
Withdrawals.
in, and yeah, I gotta have it, and it's like you're gonna be fine. People have lived for, millions of years without this, so you're gonna be okay. But yeah, I think, and you would notice it. We would travel with the team at a hotel. Our team is interacting and joking because I told them you can't have your phone at dinner. You can have it, but you got to eat in your room. And so they would come down and you'd see them laughing and joking and picking on each other. And it was fantastic. And then there's another table over here of another country, silent, just as quiet as a church mouse over there, just playing on their phones. And no interaction and no team building, no bonding going on. And, I think we need more of that. And I like to think that that the new generation starting to catch on to that and how important it is.
Yeah, and one of the things that kind of touches on too is like the slight, like giving the different types just a slight taste of the different way of thinking, the different way of seeing the model. Like again, it doesn't need to be a full perspective shift, but just giving them a touch of it. And where you were talking about how they're not playing baseball anymore. I work with this. I hit. He's one of my buddies. He owns a hitting facility, and one of the best things, like they have hit tracks, they have all of the tools, but like for a lot of their athletes, like just getting them to play baseball again and getting them to swing and feel their swing again and getting them just again, it's not throwing out all the other stuff, but it's just giving them a taste of that so they have the balance and they know what both sides feel like and what they can kind of adjust with in the same way that you're giving them a taste of the known no phone, no analytics in that setting, just conversation. And it's crazy like how almost little of an intervention you have to have and just a little of a taste of the other side of thinking, the other side of trying the sport out, trying the technique out, and how much of a massive difference that can lead for those athletes and the freedom that they have. Where it's again with they have all the hit track stuff, they have all the pitching machines that they can do, they have all of this stuff, and for some athletes, they pull them out of that for a little bit, then they bring them back into the metrics, and they're playing baseball again, and their metrics are better. And I think that's one of the things. It's not like this woo-wooey winning doesn't matter. It's all about fun and like just have it's like it's you can have both, right? Like that's one of the main things when I talk about this stuff because I know I'm an I, so I get very woo-wooey in a lot of these thought processes. But it's like you can have the best of both worlds in some of these settings, and it doesn't need to be you need to make that analytical athlete the most creative, artistic person in the world, but giving them a taste of that and then putting them back into their analytical environments and just watching how much more free they are and the better metrics, man. And it's like I do believe there is a best of both worlds. And you were talking about finding the right recipe, like and again, I think you just have to play around with it just a little bit rather than be that one trick pony over and over again.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think you're right. The virtuoso is the way to be. As a coach, you gotta move across the spectrum. I'll give you an example. I had an athlete once that did not like me at all. And it was a male athlete. He and I could not see eye to eye. And I made it my mission to get along with this guy. I was going to get along with him. I was going to figure it out. And it took me, so for about those first 4 years there, we struggled. And after I went through my training and I had this vision of making myself a better version of myself and being that virtuoso coach, I reached out to this guy as often as I could, and it was a struggle. For the first few years, I had to bite my tongue because he was short with me, and he just didn't care. He was. But I had to earn his trust, and I knew that, and I was going to stick to my guns, and I was going to continue to treat him the way he needed to be treated. And the reason I say needed is because the golden rule. You'll often hear the golden rule is to treat people the way you want to be treated, right? But sometimes treating people the way they want to be treated, perhaps that's a better way to do it, right? Because I was treating athletes the way I wanted to be treated. And I learned quickly it's not about me, and it's not about how I want to be treated. It's about how they want to be treated. And each of them wants to be treated a little bit differently. And what I learned talking about fun, you mentioned fun is different for everyone. So so fun for me, if you ask an athlete, go around the room and ask out what's fun? Define fun in sport. And some will tell you winning is fun for me. Some will tell you hanging out with the guys in the locker room is fun. Having a good esprit de corps, having a great time with my teammates is fun. So it really depends. Getting into the details, studying the analytics of the sport is fun. So the fun's an interesting word because I've learned in sport that everyone's definition of it's different. So it's like I didn't have any fun. Well, I had fun, and so it's really and it's about having those conversations about how we're built, what drives us, what are we motivated by, learning about that motivation component is important. So yeah, I agree completely. Everyone's a little bit different. Having those conversations is key, and it gives everyone a little bit of grace. So I know that particular athlete over there just likes to sit in the weeds and study the details, but that's fun for him. It's okay. Stay there. Do your thing, As long as you don't overplay it and it becomes a hindrance to your performance, you're good. I'm supportive of that. I don't want you to be someone you're not. Be yourself.
So when you're building out like this Olympic bobsled team, are you looking at these different personalities and like how the team like fits together and gels together in that setting to where like some of that is more secluded and maybe we try to pair them up with a D or we try to pair them up with some like how are you building out those like relationships to where they're interacting with people like that in the team? Because and I'm thinking in the like American football world where it's like it's almost easier in the American football world because there's 100 athletes, right? So like you're gonna get a wide variety, and you need that wide variety, and it's so how helpful it is to have 100 different variations of that because everybody is helping somebody in some regard to make it fun. So like you have the goofballs. Like we had a playoff game where we had two we had two guys. We were up big, but there was two guys in the huddle. They were just the biggest goons ever. And then you had like three guys that were just super hardos, and you had like the middle. But I was like looking around at one point, and I'm like, oh my God, like everybody's having fun in a totally different way here, but everybody needs each other in that setting. Like some guys loosen it up and there's two goons that are like together. But if everybody's like that, it's going to be way too loosey-goosey. But again, in the American football world, it kind of happens naturally just because you have so many athletes in that regard. Like you have so many options to do that. Whereas the bobsled world, it's going to be a little bit smaller. Like how are you building out that? How are you working with that thing?
Yeah, that's a great point. I unfortunately, well, actually, fortunately, I should say, there's really no recipe for this and putting people together. And as a team, as a coach, we have a selection criteria that we have to go by. So we always stick with that when we select teams. We never go off of personalities or behavior. Behavior slightly in that, as long as you're not getting DUIs and beating up people in bars, well, that's, you're good. Um, but let's imagine a team. So you said with your American football team, you had what, two guys that were the super outgoing goons or whatever.
Yeah.
Now imagine 100 of those guys, and now you don't have anyone to calm this place down. You've probably got 100 goons going nuts out there. That's crazy. That's not going to work, probably, right?
No.
Now, the opposite of that is you've got 100 librarians, right, that never talk and never communicate. They're never outgoing. There's no, outward verbal motivation. It's just kind of, a dead library, if you will. So having that mix is important, and I've seen it work both ways. We had our 2014 Olympic team that won an Olympic silver medal. There was really I wouldn't say any of those guys were super outgoing or influential or anything like that. I remember people used to say, well, they're kind of quiet, boring guys. And I said, well, there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay. They're winning, right? And they're doing well, and it syncs well for them. They're synchronized well as a team together, regardless of what their behaviors or personalities or preferences or habits are like. So, and then I've seen it the other way. I've seen four guys get together on a bobsled team that are just a bunch of wild animals, that it's hard to control, and they're successful too. So it's really just a matter of can they fit together? And you're right, you need those. And I think the important part of a team, especially in a football team or a bobsled team, or where you've got a group of guys working well together, you've got to have a balance of all that. And each team member's got to understand how the other operates and what they bring to the table for this team, and how it's helping us, and not look at it from a what's wrong with you kind of perspective. It's not what's wrong. And we often say that we have strengths and limitations with athletes and coaches, but we don't have a weakness, because we don't like to use the word weakness, because weakness sort of it doesn't give us any direction. It doesn't tell us what to do. If you've got a weakness, now what? It's not necessarily a weakness if you're direct, if you're influential, if you're steady, if you're conscientious. Those are all strengths if they're played right, and you've got the right recipe for those things. So, but the interactions, I mean, between some of these people, some of the best memories I've ever had. I mean, my kids were telling me they've got a kid on their baseball team. My son, he's 13. He doesn't talk. He just walks up and stares at him and makes a funny face and walks off. And the team cracks up. He doesn't even say a word, and he cracks up the team. And I think that's fantastic. So, and then there's other guys that don't shut up, and they tell jokes, and they goose everybody every chance they get. And that's the esprit de corps. That's what the spirit of the team and the energy, you need that. It's an important thing. At least I believe that. I've found it to be successful. It's about understanding the differences and synchronizing yourself and your preferences to self-manage and help the team and yourself get to be the best version of yourself.
Well, I love the point where you're talking about how there are no weaknesses. because one of the things I get asked a question about is like how to learn a skill. Like I get it all the time. It's like, how do you learn how to like Olympic lift? How do you learn how to do this better? How do you learn how to do that better? And like for me, a lot of it's like you have to learn what type of learner you are. And I think a lot of people like the weakness thing that I hear a lot is like I'm a slow learner. Like I get that a lot. And like they get frustrated at these really fast learners and they like a lot of times they're super athletes, but they're just people that pick things up very quickly. And to me, it's like it's not a weakness that you're a slow learner. Like because typically what I have found is these slow learners, like your weakness and your limitation in being able to pick things up quickly is matched by a consistency and persistency piece because you know you have to be consistent and persistent to do that. Whereas a lot of times these faster learners, they pick it up so quick that they lose interest in the task. So they're not consistent and persistent with it, right? They don't have the motivation factor. And that's one of the things that I lay out with them. It's like, if you consider yourself to learn slow or you consider yourself to not pick things up as quickly, then you emphasize and you build out an environment in which the consistency and persistency piece is rewarded. And on the other end of things, if everything comes to you easy, like you have to find a way to keep things challenging, right? And both of those things are tough skill sets, but I feel like just both sides look at each other. It's like, oh, that guy is just like grinder and he's able to like reach a higher level. And the other side looks at the other side and like, oh, he picks everything up very quickly. It's like, yeah, but then he loses interest and doesn't do it. So you both are reaching a mediocre like middle ground instead of like reaching that full potential because you haven't built out your environment in the best way. And I just think knowing that about yourself and like teaching your athletes about yourself is unbelievably powerful. It's just something that's it's not talked about. It's like the actual technique and the journey of learning it is talked about and all these like specific things they're talking about. But it's like, okay, what like how do you learn and what do you learn and what environment are best for you to like reach the level that you need to reach? And can we build that environment out for you rather than focusing on like just shoving like a square peg through a round hole there?
I couldn't agree more. And that's the how do you like to be coached conversation that we oftentimes, don't have that we need to have. And that deliberate learn, you're right. The slower ones can I was a slower one at times, but I was just more deliberate about what I was doing. And I was more conscientious about what I was doing. I was putting in the work. And I had to make sure that every T was crossed and every I was dotted. And I just can't move through this quickly sometimes. So it depends. And I've seen other athletes move through it very quickly and then they're done. It's take Tom Brady, for example. I mean, Tom, what was he, a 199th pick? I mean, he had all
Yeah.
the reason in the world to leave. He wasn't a quick learner, I guess, whatever. But it happened at the right time for him. So I think you're exactly right. And I think communicating with each other, how do you like to be coached? How do you learn? What helps you learn best? Are you and here's another thing I've learned too with athletes. So we learn three different ways. We learn through auditory, visual, and kinesthetic, touching, right? Feeling. And so driving a bobsled, what we learned was you can tell an athlete what to do, verbally explain, I want you to run 5 yards, plant your foot, turn left, turn around, put your hands together, catch the ball, whatever. So you've got that verbal feedback. And then there's the visual feedback, and that's going to be watching a video of yourself and getting that feedback in the video room after practice or after a game. And then there's the kinesthetic learning, which is, you execute the action and then you catch the ball and you feel what it's like to run this route and catch this ball. And now you've got a feeling for it. And what I learned as a coach is you got to do all three. You can't just, and each athlete will gravitate. There'll be a gravitational pull to one of those particular styles more so than the other. I learned about myself. I'm more of a visual learner. So my coaches would talk and talk and talk, and they sounded like Charlie Brown's teacher to me after a while. I'm like, I don't know what you're saying. I'm caught. I feel like I'm in a vocabulary class. And so I said, just show me. And as soon as they'd show me on a video on an iPad, how to take the turn or how to turn the sled down in the turn or whatever, I got it. Now I needed the verbal, but I learned more from the visual, and now I got to go feel what that's like. And so as a coach, it's important to make sure you've got all three of those components. Another one I learned too with video in particular with women and men, and I learned this from Anson Dorrance. Anson Dorrance was a soccer coach at University of North Carolina. I think he's got 23 national championships, women's soccer. It's outrageous. But he had told me once, he said, be careful with your video feedback to your athletes because males and females will receive it differently. So, for example, I could stand in a room and, maybe you're beating up the team one day, you're trying to get them straight, berating the team a little bit. If you've got all males in the room, or if you're criticizing, let's say it's something you're trying to improve upon, you're giving some feedback. Most of the men, if it's negative and it's corrective towards the team, they'll think you're talking about the guy next to them. They won't think you're talking about them. If you've got a group of women in the room, women are generally, we're talking in stereotypes here, but generally women tend to be a little more self-conscious of these things. They tend to be a little more accountable for these things. So if you're talking to a group of women and you're beating them up and berating them in a room, well, they're going to think you're talking directly to them specifically. They're going to take it to heart specifically. And so with video, for example, one of the things I learned was with men, I have to often show them the video to prove I'm right and they're wrong because they'll say, "No, I didn't do that." Yes, you did. And so I'll have to show them the video. Look, this is what you did, right? With a female, we tend not to show them the negative impacts of their performance or anything that they didn't execute perfectly. We tend to reinforce the positive with it. Women beat themselves up enough. They really do. They're hard enough on themselves. You don't have to be harder on a female. It's about getting their confidence up and boosting their confidence. And so what we would do is reinforce the positive. When they would do it correctly, hey, how'd that feel? Because it was fantastic. I loved it. Do it again. So yeah, those components I think are essential. And try, being a self-aware coach and having that people acuity, you'll start to figure that out over time. How does this athlete work? Well, they're quiet, they like video feedback, and they don't like a feedback sandwich, the feedback sandwich, it looked great. I think if we tweak that one little piece, you'll be better. And also, that was fantastic. Do that again. That feedback sandwich. I never like that. It just never helped me. But some people need that. So it's a matter of determining what this athlete needs, how I connect. And some of it is just organic. It just happens. You probably have organic relationships with your athletes that it just it's easy. I don't have to try. But there's some we're gonna have to try with, and some, the few that we try with. I mean, there are ways to do it. And back to the athlete, I had a great relationship with that athlete that I worked with that I wanted to earn some respect from and earn a relationship with. And he and I had ended up with a great relationship. And there was a personal issue he had in his life that was very, I won't say tragic, but it could have been. He had a family member that had a potential terminal illness, and he came to me one night and shared his feelings about that. And this is the same guy that wanted nothing to do with me, a couple years prior. And I felt like, man, I did something. I helped this athlete get better, and I made myself better too. So anyway, that's what it takes. I think that self-awareness, people acuity, and then the self agility to figure it out, and the self-management.
Yeah, that watching tape with guys is the most that is the most accurate description of watching tape. I've never thought about it that way, but that is so true. It's like you're watching, like, yeah, that's he did that wrong. No, dude, we're talking about you right here. That's
Yeah.
so funny. That's the perfect description. I want to pull you back into a little bit of the mental models and a little bit into some of the physical stuff, just because the bobsledding world is kind of I would say new to me, but new to I feel like not new. Novice to a lot of people.
Unknown,
Yeah,
maybe.
unknown. Yes, 100%. And this is coming from a hammer thrower in college. So, like, I totally
Oh,
get that.
cool.
It's like the most niche sport of all time. But you're talking about selection criteria, and that's how you stick with like building out your team. What are the KPIs for that selection criteria? Like, how do you go about like these are the metrics that matter and are going to make a like successful bobsledder? Because I think a lot of times you can get lost in these metrics and miss it. And I think the more the sport is like the American football world, you have these selection criteria that, in some regards, like really have no say in what the actual player is going to be like, right? And then as you get more into a analytical sport, something like cyclists, like that's almost all that matters. Like you can almost predict their performance based off these like criteria. So like, what's that process like, and how is that in the bobsledding world?
Yeah, so in bobsled, we have a selection criteria that's developed in conjunction with the athletes. So the leadership team, which is the CEO, high performance director, the USOPC, their high performance directors, the head coach, the coaches, and then you'll normally have one or two athlete representatives involved in this as well. And then we all sit down and come to a consensus. And this is a constantly, it's a fluid document that's changing, that you lock in, obviously, the year prior to making the big selection, which would be your world championship team or your Olympic team. And honestly, it varies every few years, and there's a few things in there that we take out or adjust. So, one of the most important things would be, for example, your international results. What are your international results? What are your push times as a push athlete? What are your results as a driver? We look at your experience. We'll talk about your off-season testing, but that won't matter as much to certain people. Like, for example, if I'm the head coach, I'm not going to look at your off-season testing as much. It matters about how you came into the season to me. But if it's February, I need to know where you're at right now. Your ability to stay healthy. Are you an athlete that gets injured often? Um, Attitude and dedication to the team. So that's a component that's just more of a subjective thing that we look at, but it does matter. If you're a bad attitude, a bad apple, and you bring a lot of whining and complaining and excuses to the team every day for why you're not doing your job, it it doesn't matter how well you're able to execute. If you bring that toxic environment, man, we certainly don't want that on an Olympic team in a high pressure stakes environment. Um, what we did as a team was we formulated our values as a team, and the values were teamwork, integrity, commitment. We call it TIC, and those are the three words. We asked our athletes over a few weeks to come up with some values that they wanted to have, and our leadership team was involved in that as well. Everybody, the whole team was. And we said it can be one word, it can be 20, whatever you want. We ended up on three, and we decided teamwork was important, integrity was important, and commitment. And those are the three things. So those three values are in there. So attitude, dedication to the team, as well as teamwork, commitment, integrity. Those are the subjective things that we look at as a committee. And then the rest of it is results. And it might be your individual push times on the push track. It might be your squat, your power clean, your sprint times. Sprint times are extremely valuable to us. The speed component is probably, well, it is the most important component. Now, you still need to be strong and powerful to push a bobsled, but you can be strong and powerful and not have enough speed. I used to always say you'll never be fast enough. You can be strong enough to push a bobsled, but you'll never be fast enough unless you run a 0.01 in the 40-yard dash. Now you're fast. You're fast enough. But you just, so we look at all those things. And also, we take feedback from the driver. The reason that's important is because the drivers are in the sled. It's like taking feedback from a quarterback on a football team. Who you want on your offensive line? If you don't trust that person on the offensive line and that person doesn't make you feel warm and fuzzy, well, why would we pair you guys up? It just doesn't make any. I mean, this is a recipe for disaster. And so that, and then push athlete feedback. So we take athlete from the push athletes. They may say, hey, for example, an analogy might be, hey, an offensive lineman says, I don't like that quarterback. He likes me, but I don't like blocking for him. Well, let's trade you. We need to get you out of here because that quarterback's not going anywhere. Or maybe we need a other quarterback. So it's that component, that trust, that alignment of values is important as well. So it starts with the stuff you can measure, the objective stuff. But then oftentimes when you have a tiebreaker, you may look at the subjective attitude, dedication to the team, teamwork, commitment, integrity type stuff.
And so when you're building out, because it is such a physically dominated sport, like when you're building out practices and like, yeah, building up for the Olympics, like what does that kind of look like? Are you doing a lot of the strength conditioning stuff, or is it you're doing a lot of the skill stuff? Like how are you building? Because like you said, like if they're not fast enough, like I feel like you could do all the technical work you want. It's like you don't have the motor for this to matter. We need to go build up the motor. Like, well, what's a practice? What's a day kind of look like when you're building all this stuff out?
So it starts in, let's say the season just ended in February. And then what we normally tell our athletes is for March, April, May, go get active rest. Rest your body, let the micro tears heal. Talk to your strength conditioning coach. Now, we've had strength conditioning coaches and speed coaches as a part of our team, but the problem is, and you know this too, everyone has their own preference for a strength and conditioning or speed coach. They just do. It's like picking your wife or husband or whatever.
So
They
dramatic.
they just have their own preferences, and that's okay. And we said, hey, listen, we'll have a strength and conditioning and speed coach available. If you don't want to use that person, it's okay. If you want to get your own coach in Pittsburgh or in Florida or in California and do your own thing, that's great. Go do your own thing and meet us back here in August. In August or August, September, we'll get together on the ice push track and we'll have push competition. So each person will push the sled individually, which doesn't always identify the best athlete because some athletes can push a sled faster with other athletes
Hmm.
than they can by themselves. Some are good by themselves and with other athletes, and some are good by themselves and not necessarily with other athletes. So
What makes
obviously
the difference
that's
there?
speed is normally the biggest component. An athlete that's really, really powerful will probably be able to push by themselves and with another athlete. Let's say you put two power athletes on the same sled, you may get the same time as if you had one power and one speed athlete.
Hmm.
So if you had an Olympic weightlifter and a track athlete on the team, it may be the same as two sprinters or two Olympic lifters on a team. It really depends. It really, and that's why we have to test it is because there's no recipe we don't know. We don't know. Maybe Mike and Austin are a great team. Maybe Austin and Tristan are a better team. We just don't know. We got to test it and see. So we'll test in the ice house. Now, the other component to this too is as we're testing, there's no track. This is an ice push track. So they push down an ice push track, they go into a compression, they go up a hill, and then they come back, and then we continue to push. And this is a testing environment. When you've got to strap on a helmet and go down a mile of ice and potentially crash and break bones, that's a whole nother component that comes into play. And you'll see that in athletes when they get up to push, there's a little hesitancy. They'll pull back a little bit to make sure they get in. And the anxiety kicks in, right? Because there's no coming back. We're going down this mountain, whether you like it or not, and your helmet better be buckled. And if you crash, it's going to hurt. And you've got to be willing to accept that danger. It's just, really same thing in football. I mean, I'm running across the middle to catch this pass and Ray Lewis is over there in the middle, and I'm going to get hit, and it's going to hurt. If you can't do it, then we got to find someone else. Maybe he can catch that ball all day in practice, but in the game with that stud linebacker waiting to hit him, it's just not going to work. He just can't accomplish that. So there's another factor. We find that out, and then what we do is we tell all the athletes, pick yourselves. So it's a peer selection. And the coaches stay completely out of it. And they all pick themselves. And the drivers will pick push athletes, and the push athletes will arrange themselves to pick a certain driver. And
Hmm.
this is fun to watch. This is the best part, right? And as a coach, you're just sitting back watching all this transpire. And sometimes this happens up until the night before the competition, the Olympic, the national team trials. They're musical sleds moving around and jockeying and trying to get in with the right driver, and so got hurt and so left that team. It's almost like an NFL draft type
Yeah.
situation, right? And it is great. I love watching. It's entertaining as a coach. It's really highly stressful as an athlete because you're trying to pick the right horse, and it's tough. And then they go out and compete, and we have a race. and the top sleds, top athletes are selected for the national team. And then we go on the World Cup tour and we compete. And assuming that if an athlete's doing well or a combination of athletes are doing well, our team is doing well, we tend to keep them together. If they're not doing well, that's when the coach steps in and moves people around. And so we might say, hey, Austin tested well in the off season. Nobody picked him up because he's a rookie. We're going to give him a chance because, Joe and Tony haven't been getting it done. So Joe, you're out. Austin, you're going to push with Tony this race and see you get your chance to see what you can do. And so that little maneuvering, and sometimes there's just I can't explain it. I've been in the sport for 30 plus years, and I know people that have been in it longer than me. I can't put my finger on it. There's an X factor, and you've seen this in football too. Sometimes you just put a team together and it clicks.
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't. And you're like, this should click. It worked on paper. It worked in the huddle. Why is this not happening? And I can't. I have no explanation. And I mean, as a coach, you got to be willing to try those things because it's the same thing in a draft, I imagine. You're drafting people. Are they going to fit in with a team? Are they going to fit in the locker room? Is this connection, the synchronicity going to work between this quarterback and receiver, quarterback and running back, whatever that might be? It's like there is an X factor, an unknown.
And when you're working with these athletes, and then they're on the team, is the growth piece, because this is something I'm interested in. It's like you have 4 years to prepare for this, the biggest event in the world, you know what I mean? And is it okay, is it a physical, for these 4 years you need to get bigger, faster, stronger type thing, or is it more of this skill of learning the bobsled? What is that process like, and how do you continue to refine that throughout 4 years? I feel because it's all building up for one big thing that you're refining day in and day out for that. Is it physical? Is it skill? Well, what's the thing you guys are trying to grow? Obviously both ideally, but what's the biggest thing that you kind of see when you're going through that 4 year journey with these athletes?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So as a push athlete, especially, you're hyper focused on your bigger, faster, stronger.
Yep.
You're trying to, not necessarily bigger. You may be trying to get bigger. You may be trying to lose weight. Weight is a component. So we do want to make sure that as an athlete, as a team of athletes, that there's a balance. So for example, in a 4-man bobsled, you can have 4 guys that all weigh 230 pounds each. But if you've got a guy that weighs 250, you need
Somebody
a
has to
guy
wait.
that weighs 210 to offset that, right? So, or that 250 guy needs to come down to 240 to help us out. So it
Is that
really
is that for optimal, or is that the rule? There's a certain weight on the
That's the rule.
that's rule.
That's the
Okay.
rule. Yeah. Now you can win with 4 guys at 200 pounds. You
Yep.
don't have to be. If you guys synchronize well and you push the sled well, so it starts individually with you working with your strength conditioning and speed coach, being the fastest, most powerful athlete you can possibly become, and then syncing up these 4 athletes on a 4-man sled, for example, or in the case of the women, it'd be a 2-woman sled. And now what we got to match up is your weight to make sure you meet the weight requirement. Now we've got to match up your aerodynamic riding position in the sled. So when you sit down and you tuck down, are you guys an aerodynamic riding position, or do you kind of look weird in here with one helmet higher than the other one? So we kind of look at that. We look at stride length and stride frequency, making sure that if we can achieve it, we'd like to see athletes striking the ground at the same time with their feet.
Hmm.
The timing needs to be important when they hit the sled. This
So they're trying to
timing.
sync up their sprint when they're pushing the sled.
Yeah, and it's
Interesting.
it's it's actually not something they try to do. It's something that we would like to see happen, but we don't actually try to achieve. For whatever reason, when we've slowed the videos down and watched their foot strike on the ice, when all the athletes' foot strikes happen at the same time, there just seems to be a nice fast push with high velocity. Also, your experience. So, loading from the left side of the sled, loading from the right side of the sled, or loading from the brakes. Oftentimes, we'll put the fastest athlete in the back. The last one to load will be the fastest athlete. They're typically the smaller sprinter, faster type. They need to be tough. Doesn't always work that way. But generally speaking, that's, you want your big power guy to get in first if he's the slowest athlete. That's why we test him in a 30-meter sprint. They're typically going to beat you to 10 meters, but they're going to probably begin to slow the sled down, or maybe they've meet maximum velocity. And so if we've got other athletes that are contributing to the push or not slowing it down, then we'll have them load later. And the load happens very quickly, happens very fast. It's very tight, very synchronized. As a team, they need to work on that. And then, of course, the ability to work together and the desire to be on the same team with hey, these are my boys. I want to go to the Olympics with these guys. And then that 4-year plan it almost never works. Almost never. That you put a team together and stay together for 4 years. It almost never works because people get hurt. There are injuries that happen in sport. It could be a hamstring tear. It could be, I don't know, you've seen athletes just maybe, I always tell athletes for the quad, think of it as a 7, 8, 9, and a 10. So the first year, you're going to have a 7 in terms of your exertion level, let's say. An 8, a 9 the year before the games, you need to fine tune things. And then the Olympic year needs to be a 10 in terms of your exertion level, how hard you're exerting yourself. Because and you know this as well in any training, if you're going 10, 10, 10, 10,
Done.
and if unless you're on steroids, which we don't use drugs because we get drug tested all the time. You're gonna struggle. You're gonna have an injury. So it's about picking the timing of your when you want to achieve be at your very best.
Yeah, the journey that's where it's like the process of, and this is something I think about in the hammer world too. Just all the like smaller, like unknown niche sports too. It's like a 4-year commitment to something that nobody, like, you have to explain to people you're doing bobsled, or you have to explain to people you're doing hammer throwing. Like it's the level of dedication and interest. Like that's why I feel like that's a massive. I know in the throwing world, like it's really not the sport that breaks them. It's almost like everything around the sport of like, you're doing all of this and you have a bad meet and you spent 3 years building up for this, that it's not like NFL football where you're getting paid 4 million, like millions of dollars to go do it and everybody's praising you. It's like you got 10 random fans, you're one of the best in the world at this sport, and then something bad goes, you're like, people crash out in that world. Is that pretty common in the bobsled
Yeah.
world?
Yeah, absolutely. And for sure, I see more athletes injured in their training than they are doing the sport. They
Mm.
tend to, we have athletes get injured in bobsled, races all the time, pushing and crashing. But I would say more often than not, more of our injuries are happening on the sprint track. Maybe they're not warmed up properly. They haven't sprinted enough. They haven't built up enough of a base or whatever that might be. They haven't maybe been hydrated, whatever. I see more injuries training in the summer in the off season than I do with athletes getting hurt in the sport. And then back to the 4-year plan, I forgot to mention this. It's a little bit different for drivers. So for drivers, you're looking at an 8 to 12-year plan if you're going to be a driver at the Olympics, because that skill. So when you drive a bobsled down a hill, you get 2 runs a day most of the time, and each run is about 60 seconds. So average of about 1 minute each run. So you get 2 minutes of practice a day. So if you do this 6 days a week, because you got a travel day, you're looking at 12 minutes in a week, right? So most of the time, a driver might maybe get an hour and a half to 2 hours of practice in a season of actually driving a bobsled. And
Is that
so
because of the risk of the run?
the not necessarily the risk, but we only have one run and everybody's got to share that run. So everybody gets a run and each one takes 2 minutes because you got to, there's a staging and an exiting that takes a minute. And then the run itself takes a minute. And also the wear and tear on your body. It's a hard ride. It
Okay.
hurts. It's not fun. I remember my first ride. I almost quit after my first run. I thought, my God, this is terrible. And everyone will see the sport and they'll think, well, isn't that like a roller coaster? And I'll say, no, roller coaster is much more comfortable than a bobsled ride.
Yeah.
You're on rails. You're probably sitting in a padded seat with a a chest strap or something like that. We don't have any of that stuff. We got a helmet. It's freezing cold. It's bumpy. There's no shock absorbers or, shocks in the sled to dampen the forces on the ride. So the ride is really brutal, and it takes a lot out of you. And so, the driver could take more on an easy track. So, for example, Park City, Utah is a much easier track. You could probably take 3 to 5 runs a week there. I'm sorry, a day, 3 to 5 runs a day, and you'll be fine. But as a push athlete, they're pushing a 500-pound sled 50 meters every day in the cold, and then jumping in fully flexed, breathing, out of breath, going down this hill. And they had to move this 500-pound sled to the line, right? Now they got to take it off the line and put it on a truck and then go back up and do it again. And they got to get to the gym and weight train and watch video and get the sports med and work on their bobsled. We're mechanics too. We got to work on our sleds. And so it's an exhausting sport. It really is. Honestly, I think that's one of the things that attracts certain people. If you love work, which I do. I like working. It's a great sport for that, but it does beat you up pretty rough. And so getting that, for a driver, they're going to need years, 4 to 8. They're going to need 6 to 8 years most likely to win an Olympic medal as a driver, to be at that level. As a push athlete, you can do it in 4. You could do it in 4 years, no problem. It's going to take some work and
So
some
as a driver,
sacrifice.
is it would you say drivers are typically faster learner types? Like would they to be able to pick if they only get
Not
the
necessarily.
really?
No,
Okay.
not necessarily. Yeah. Yeah. It really depends. We've had some push athletes that come in. Josh Williamson was one of them from Florida. And Jason Ross, he was a bobsledder from a long time ago. And both of those guys, I remember when I saw him push the first time, the first question I said was, "Have you done this before?" And no. They looked like they had been doing it for 10 years. I mean, they were, you know, so much better than athletes that have been there for years doing this, right? And some athletes just really struggle. It's just not something they sync well with. I'm not sure if it's and I mean we all have those things, those sports that we don't necessarily sync well with. It just maybe it's a hand-eye coordination thing, maybe it's a strength and conditioning. I know strength and conditioning coaches have told me basketball players, they have to sort of shift the training for very extremely tall basketball players because doing stuff that maybe a 6 foot tall athlete might not be able. They just might not be comfortable with their body type. But drivers, it's the same thing. We've had drivers that commit to driving. It takes them forever to pick it up, and then some of them, it's like, man, you've been driving. You look like you've been driving for 10 years. It just really depends.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. We've been running long. I didn't mean to take up this much of your day, but I had one last question. You coach Blaine,
Sure.
correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Blaine's a great guy.
Do you have Blaine is a friend of the podcast. Everybody loves Blaine. Do you have any background stories or good stories on Blaine? You got any dirt for us there?
No, I wish I did. Blaine's a great athlete, a great person. He dedicated himself to the sport, did everything. He lived in Iceland, so he
Yeah.
would travel back and forth. And I remember him talking about his family, and he was. You could trust Blaine. Blaine was always where he was supposed to be, doing what he was supposed to do. Worked his tail off the whole time he was there. He's a great teammate, super talented, athletic, and I think if he'd had 4 more years, he would have made this coming Olympic team. But he came within a hair. I mean, he was like, I think he was the last guy that I think we cut making the Olympic team in 2022. But he made a remarkable run in his time there. We recruit hundreds of people, and he made it right to that final top 12 or top 15 athletes. And yeah, great guy. Love Blaine. Worked hard. And Blaine was one of those guys. I didn't have to worry. Like, you don't worry about Blaine. You don't worry that he's not where he's supposed to be. He's not in the gym. Blaine is in the gym.
Blaine
Blaine,
is
you got to
in
pull
the
out of the
gym.
gym. Yeah. Hey, Jim or Blaine, I need you out of the gym. Take a rest, save it for the hill, save it for bobsled. Never had a problem with a guy. I mean, he was the standard of teamwork, commitment, integrity. Love Blaine, great guy.
Just a freak. I love Blade as well. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
I mean, and absolutely a freak. I mean, I remember watching him in the weight room and throwing up weight and just being, and like I said, bobsled, we tend to attract freaks. That's just what we get. And there's a number of those athletes out there that if you're fast, strong, and powerful and a little bit, maybe not all there, we can turn you into a bobsledder. And,
We got a
Blaine,
spot for you.
yeah, we got a spot for you. So Blaine probably had more time. He's probably got more stories putting up with us and the rest of the team than we have of him.
Well, that's awesome. I appreciate you taking the time out of today, Coach. This was awesome, and I got a lot out of it. So thank you for being on.
Austin, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it too. Maybe we can link up again sometime. And thank you for all your insight. I learned a lot from you today too. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you guys for listening. Keep chopping wood.
Thank you for listening. Join us next week as we dive down another rabbit hole. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star rating. Follow us on Instagram at Austin Yoakum to stay updated on future podcast guests. Keep chopping wood.